Hello everybody, my name is Madeleine Carrington. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and I run Fire Up Ministries with my husband Simon. And we speak about theology of the body, and we provide and create resources on St. John Paul II's theology of the body. So I'm really excited to be part of this conference and to share a little bit about my story with you to help you on your faith journey and your relationship with Christ. And I just think this is such a brilliant conference. You know, all of these talks that you're going to be hearing are about living a Christ-centered life. And what's so awesome about that is, this is what it's all about. The journey to heaven, our vocation, our path to happiness and holiness, it all starts with living a Christ-centered life. And so soak this up, as you're watching these talks and hearing, different perspectives on this and how people have learned and lived this out over the years. Really soak it in and try to apply it as much as you can to your life. So what I really want to spend some time with you today discussing is, for me, what does it mean? When I really sat with this topic, living a Christ-centered life, I really thought that for me, the most important aspect of living a Christ-centered life really is about my identity and my understanding of who I am and who God is. And so I want to start just by sharing a little bit of my story with you. So I was raised in a Catholic home, and it was always communicated to me that the faith was important, and it was important to attend Sunday Mass. But there comes a point in everyone's life where you must choose to take on the faith as your own. And so, up until about the age of 18, just before I turned 19, I was Catholic because I was raised Catholic and my parents told me it was important. And I'm sure many of you listening to this could be in the same boat. But everyone needs to come to a point in their life where they choose to take on the faith as their own, and they are responsible for nurturing that faith and that relationship with God, and then discovering what God is calling them to and how God is calling them to live their life. And so that point came for me when I was just before I turned 19, and I started university, and I got very involved with the Catholic chaplaincy or the Catholic Society on campus at the university that I went to, and I met so many young Catholics who were on fire for the faith. They knew the faith, they had this fire in them, they had this relationship with God that was sort of a little bit foreign to me, but I knew that I wanted it. And I just couldn't get enough of being around these people. And what I learned from that was that when we are living our faith fully, we become a witness of joy. And we become almost like this magnet where people want to be around us because of the way that we are living our faith. And I remember thinking, these people have got this joy that I have never seen, but I so desperately want it. And I began just imitating them, just sort of following them around. And the first thing I noticed was that these people went to daily Mass. And these people, they knew the faith, they studied the faith, they asked questions about the faith. And their faith grew from that, and they would go to this thing called adoration. Back then, I didn't even know what adoration was, but I started to go along with them. And through this experience, I began to fall more in love with Christ, and my faith deepened, and my relationship with God really grew. And I had to reevaluate so many things in my life when this happened. When this first initial encounter with God happened, I had to reevaluate some of the friends I had in my life. And I recognized that, they were encouraging me to do things and to go places that really was not in line with this life that I wanted to pursue, this holiness that I wanted to really work at. It wasn't leading me closer to virtue, but rather these friends were leading me away from virtue. And so I had to make, some difficult decisions to distance myself from certain people in my life at this point so that my faith could really grow and I wasn't tempted to sacrifice that or be pulled away from that. And I also, there were so many different aspects of my life that I needed to reevaluate and commit to growing in virtue in different areas. And so what this sort of, as I look back and I describe this time in my life, I sort of look at, imagine that your life, you can apply this to yourself, imagine that your life is like a pie or a cake, and it's cut into different segments or different pieces. And it's like, if I look at my life as this pie, I had a piece for my friends, a piece for my family, a piece for uni, a piece for my hobbies. And then there was a piece for God, and that was sort of reserved for, 9 to 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning and a few little prayers here and there. But at this point in my life, as I started to get more into my faith and my relationship with God started to take priority in my life, I recognized that it wasn't enough to give God a piece of that pie or a piece of that cake. He needed to be in the center, and he needed to have influence, or I needed to give him permission to have every piece of my life, And so God was the center of my family. God was the center of my friendships. God was the reason I was pursuing my academic studies. God was the reason that I did my service projects or things like that. Like he was the center of everything, and my day needed to start with prayer. And it had to be this whole shift. And over the years, I've struggled with this concept a little bit, and how my life has gone through different seasons and things like that. But ultimately, it's not about fitting prayer into our day. It's about fitting our day and all the things that we need to do around our prayer, and being centered. So one thing that I really do is I have a young child, and I try as hard as I can to get up early before he wakes up so I can have some quiet time of prayer. Because otherwise, for you it might be, you sleep in as much as you can in the morning, and then your alarm goes off and you have to rush around and hurry up and get ready for school, and then everything is so busy, and you don't get a time during the day to maybe pause and focus on making God the center of your day and what you need to get done. So this concept of Christ really taking the center of my life, that's how I like to look back and describe it. And making room for God in our life, like making room for him to come and for you to encounter him. Because it's through that prayer, through that silencing of our hearts and quietening of the distractions around us, that God will speak to us. God, he's not going to shout. He's not going to raise his voice and shout over all of the distractions in our life. He's going to come to us in the stillness and the silence of our hearts. And so making that time for prayer is just so important so that we can hear the voice of God. And also to not being afraid to step out of your comfort zone. All of this was happening in my life, as I mentioned, right around the time I started university. But then it was about 6 or 7 months into that time of really working on my relationship with God that I went on a pilgrimage. And this is where everything just clicked and everything changed. I went on a 3-week pilgrimage to Egypt, Israel, and then World Youth Day in Madrid back in 2011. And it was a 3-week pilgrimage, and I came back a totally different person. My life will never or has never been the same from that trip, that pilgrimage. And it's because I had an encounter with God that just made me realize how much I wanted and needed to surrender my whole life to Him. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's really hard to let go of our dreams and our passions and our plans for our life and to totally hand it over to God, totally make this complete act of surrender, right? And trust Him. Trust can be so difficult, but it is crucial for living a Christ-centered life. And so this pilgrimage that I went on, I was totally out of my comfort zone. I didn't know anybody. I made some amazing friends on that trip who are still my best friends to this day. But when I signed up, those first few days, I didn't know anyone. I was so far away from home. It was the first time I'd ever been away on a trip without my family. And I was feeling, very alone, very insecure, very out of my comfort zone. But I remember it was the second day and we were in Egypt and we were booked to go up Mount Sinai, the mountain where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. So such a significant place. And I remember, there was a lot of anticipation and excitement about this, of course. And we were to go and trek up Mount Sinai very early, in the middle of the night, so we could be up there for sunrise. And it took about 4 hours to get up Mount Sinai. So I remember we left at 1:30 in the morning and we had about an hour bus trip in the middle of the night through the desert to get to the base. And at the base, most of us got on top of a camel in the middle of the night in the pitch black, and we trekked it about 2.5 hours up Mount Sinai as far as we could go on camelback, and we had to walk the rest. And this was all in the middle of the night. And I am petrified. I was so scared of the dark and of heights. And here I found myself alone on a camel, which is very high. If you've ever ridden a camel, I didn't realize how high they were. And it was darkness. And I remember being so afraid, so afraid. All I could think of was, why am I here? What am I doing this, And the other two things that I don't really like very much at all is the heat and snakes. And I was in the desert. So it was like all my fears were combined into one situation. And on top of all of that, I was alone. I wasn't with my family, or I didn't have any, friends at that point that I could really confide in and really sort of journey with. I felt very isolated, very alone in this foreign country, away from everything that was comfortable. And I just remember, in my heart, just calling out to God, being like, why did you bring me here? This is not my idea of a holiday. This is not fun. And I know I was on a pilgrimage, not a holiday, but this is what I was thinking. I was like, this is just ridiculous, Lord. This is just, it's too much. It's too many of my fears in one. I'm so out of my comfort zone, And so I just remember this fear. I could feel this fear just gripping me, and I was just overcome by it. And I just remember saying in my heart, Lord, if you are there, please help me. Please reveal yourself to me. And I can't really explain it to this day. I can't find the words to put to this experience, but I just felt God come. I felt this wave of peace wash over me. And this huge smile come on my face. It's freedom that I found in Christ. And I just remember in that moment being so, 1 second being so afraid, and then having Him just totally, eliminate that fear and replace it with His peace. it just filled me with this joy that has continued to sustain me to this day. And there's so many times in my life where I look back on that encounter with God, where I look back on that moment. I call it my camel moment, my camel conversion, because it was at that moment where I'm like, Lord, if you can come and if you can free me and liberate me from all of my fears, then what can I not trust you with? I give you everything. And I remember that day, it was the 3rd of August, and I was 19 years old, and I gave my life to Christ. And I said, you can have everything. Like, I will follow you. If this is the peace you will give me, if this is what you promised me, there's nowhere I won't go for you. And what I've learned over the years is that there's nothing that God will ask us to do. There's no place that he will lead us where his grace will not sustain us. And so if there's one lesson, I really want you to take away from this talk, it's that you can trust God. He is a good, good Father. And it doesn't mean there will not be suffering. It doesn't mean that it will be easy. But my goodness, I'd rather live my life with Christ than without him. And I'm so inspired by the saints, and especially the early church martyrs. And these early church saints, they encountered Christ. They found him, the one whom their heart is longing for, the one whom our heart is longing for. And they found him, and even death couldn't separate them from Christ, this newfound love in Christ. And so what sacrifices are we willing to make for our relationship with God? This is a powerful thing that we need to contemplate in our daily life and in our prayer, and being so grounded. And I want to just end with this note of, once we do have that experience with Christ, or once we do commit to working on our relationship with him, the next question is, okay, Lord, well, how do you want me to share your love with the world? How are you calling me to follow you in this life, in my life? That's really our, the first part of discovering our vocation. And so then being, brave enough to follow him wherever he will lead. And, I had an experience of that when a couple of years after that camel experience, I felt really called to go and be a missionary in the United States. And I was afraid again. There was so many things. I was scared to leave home. And again, I was afraid to step out of my comfort zone. But I eventually did. And I did go and do that year of mission in Philadelphia. And it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And there was so much grace that God wanted to give me during that time. And his grace just sustained me in ways that I can't even begin to explain. I'd be here for a very, very long time if I started to explain all the ways that God blessed me on that trip, on that year of mission. But whatever he's calling you to, if you feel that in your heart, don't be afraid to respond. Work through all the struggles and all the doubts and fears with him, but don't be afraid to respond, because he will never leave you. And you can trust him. And that's why we can give our life to him. But we have to, before we go out and serve, we have to first fill ourselves. And St. Bernard of Clairvaux has this wonderful quote that a wise man first makes himself a reservoir before a channel. And so we are called, each and every one of us, to cultivate and foster that relationship with God so that he can fill us up with all of the graces and all of the he can bless us with all the virtues we need to go and accomplish the mission he's calling us to in the world. And one thing that I take great comfort in from scripture is from the first letter of Timothy, chapter 4, verse 12. And I'd love to just end by reading that out to you. Let no one despise your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. And so my prayer for you today is that your relationship with God, your love for God, will be such a deep, deep, burning flame that you will be that magnet that will attract people to the love of Christ in such a profound way. And that you would choose every day to have a Christ-centered life, because there is nothing in this world more fulfilling and more promising of our eternal happiness. So thank you for joining me. I hope that's been helpful, and I will be praying for you. And if you would like more of our material and talks, then please visit fireupministries.com, and you can follow us on all the social medias. So God bless you, and I will be praying for you, especially during this conference. God bless.